At last, this unknown creature of the abyss blinked its eyes open, and shading them with its disengaged hand, opened its mouth and gave vent to a shouting noise, articulate almost as speech might be, that penetrated even the steel case and padded jacket of the sphere.
And welcome back to the Reign of Books podcast, episode number 10. Am I right? Is it episode number 10?
Double digits!
Episode number 10. Wow, we made it to double digits. Hey, welcome back. I'm John Keel, joining you from the War Room. My co-host is Josh Preston, joining you from the Hyrule Cube.
Hiya.
The reader's entry into great narratives, where the written page reigns supreme. And we are going over a couple of short stories by H.G. Wells, and all he had was the written page back then, so reigning supreme still. Josh, how's it going tonight?
Hey, Johnny, it's going great, man. We're fighting the internet this evening. The internet got broken, and I was worried that, we would have to sit here and do carrier pigeons or figure out some other way to do the podcast. Go back to H.G. Wells' time. Do Morse code. You think we could get an audience if we did Morse code?
I'm willing to try, but no.
Yeah, that would just be a fun experiment for us. No, I'm doing good. And we're going to launch right into the news before we do talk about H.G. Wells, one of the masters who did the classics at the turn of the century before technology really made our imaginations go wild. The first story tonight, Amazon to acquire Comixology. Amazon has agreed to acquire digital comic book publisher Comixology in a deal whose terms are not disclosed. The acquisition is expected to close second quarter of this year. The CEO of Comixology and co-founder David Steinberger said, "We have long had the goal of making every person on the planet a comics fan, and with Amazon's help, this crazy goal is more possible than ever before. With the Kindle, Amazon has shown a passion for reinventing the reading experience, just like Comixology has shown for comics and graphic novels." And I was excited because obviously big acquisition, maybe it lowers the cost. Just like with the ebook revolution, John, maybe we see a baseline price point for comics that's even lower where they are now because, as I've mentioned before, I think comics are too expensive. I do love what digital comics can do, what they look like. For some reason, I'm torn because in this one instance, with this type of fiction, with artwork, I might want to actually buy the physical copy. Maybe that's a childhood thing, but I can live with ebooks without a real library in the house. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'll get back into reading comics because of this, but it's the price point, John.
Yeah, I'm extremely happy to hear about this for probably three different reasons. One being I'm more happy about paying with my credit card knowing that the parent company is Amazon. I feel like Comixology is going to have better internet security. Not that Amazon hasn't been compromised or couldn't be, but it just feels better to me. It makes sense that Amazon would have it. Number two, they own Audible already. Why not own a comic book company? And they've got the Kindle Fire that they came out with a couple years ago. It makes sense to get this kind of content on there. I think it's a great move. I trust Amazon. I feel like Amazon has a reader's best interest in mind. Yeah, they're trying to make a buck, but they push a lot of books out like we've never seen before they came along. So I'm extremely excited to hear this.
Yeah, maybe there's new directions they can go in. I'm not sure what kind of R&D that they'll put toward comics. They put Amazon Worlds, which is self-publishing. Who knows if we see some new artists and they do kind of the same thing for comics as they did for books with self-publishing. That is just speculation, but that's exciting. I mean, amateur artists, and you can see your comics, so that's good for the artist, my artistic sensibilities. Also in the news this week, Zola Books makes iOS app social. Everything's going to social, even the reading experiences. Zola Books has updated the iOS reading app. The update comes a couple of months after the company acquired the social recommendation app Bookish. The acquisition brought new technology and social sharing capabilities to Zola. And with the new update, Zola is adding the ability for readers to add comments in a book on a line-by-line basis, as well as to share inside of books. The app is also now preloaded with 17 classic books. In addition, the app update now allows users to sign in using any of their social profiles. The update comes as the social sharing or social reading business has been shaken up in recent weeks. Last month, ReadMill revealed plans to shutter its social reading platform. On the flip side, Wattpad announced $46 million in funding. I think we covered Wattpad last week. It's a true social sharing network where readers or writers rather don't get paid, and you can delete posts just like you can in another social sharing network. So that's interesting. That's kind of the wild west of social media for publishing. In ReadMill, I knew about that just because of WordPress's plugin for that, and didn't really know what it was about, but it claimed to be some type of reading experience that plugged into the big WordPress universe, and that again, completely in a way, shutting down. They're not being acquired or anything. But I'm excited because you know what, like you said before the podcast, I love sharing certain excerpts from books, and this is a way where I'll maybe convince non-fiction readers to say, look at this great language, and I would definitely share excerpts.
Well, a new way is always a good way. Hey, the last news story is about the time that a TV series spends on the original content or the books, or how much TV time does one page from a book get if that book has been turned into a movie or a TV series. And this was an interesting little story. I did not realize that Boardwalk Empire, which I've never watched, they've been able to create 4 seasons of TV show for Boardwalk Empire out of a 312-page book. Wow, that's got to be an author's dream, right? They really dug into the material, and of course, in this case, they probably expanded out a little bit, made a few additional storylines, and let's not forget that movie writing and TV writing, it is writing. You got to write the script out for these actors to speak and act and all those different things. So definitely something we scan over often. We got to keep that in mind. And then they discuss Game of Thrones. There's about 2,000 pages of material so far that have been covered, and they've got about 26, almost 27 hours of showtime out of those 2,000 pages. So basically, each page from the books that have been covered so far in Game of Thrones, each page has gotten about 0.8 minutes of screen time.
It's about 50 seconds, a little less than 50 seconds of screen time per page.
Right. It's just about nothing. And how many times do you hear people complain about how much better the book was? And you know, when Hollywood tries to take on something that's really deep with a lot of content and a lot of characters thinking things and emotional content and things you really have to read to comprehend. I mean, I guess there's not a lot of time if you want to push the story ahead. Think about if they tried to turn Hyperion into a book. Not just that one book. That could easily be a trilogy. What we went through in the last few podcasts could easily be a trilogy. There was so much content if they wanted to be true to the story. So
I'm just thankful they made Game of Thrones into a TV series because George R.R. Martin basically said, you know, this can't be a movie. Lord of the Rings I thought was well done as a movie, but the whole concept of Game of Thrones getting 50 seconds per page through a TV show is pretty awesome. The great thing about this story was the company Statista.com did an infographic that showed the per page time per page, how much screen time it was for different books. And Boardwalk Empire was like 8.5 minutes or 8 minutes and 45 seconds per page. So if you can imagine, it would take you 8.5 minutes to read one page. You're a pretty slow reader, but that's how much, on average, you know, they didn't take the book page by page, obviously, and film every scene in the book. But if you do a total page count, they did it for Dexter as well. Dexter was a book before it was a TV series. So for the whole 7-season run, I don't know if they're counting just the first Dexter book or the sequels, but that's 2.5 minutes. Hannibal was 1 minute and 45 seconds. I'm ballparking these. They're doing fractions. I'm converting it to seconds. House of Cards, which I love on Netflix. Had no idea it was a book. I might actually read it. Political thriller. That's about 1.5 minutes. Dracula, 1 minute and 6 seconds. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, this infographic, and there's a lot more statistics. We'll put the article in our show notes. It's a lot. The Hobbit actually got 1 minute and 25 seconds about for every minute of every page was 1.5 minutes of screen time. So there's lots of fun stuff. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows only got 20-something seconds. 25
Let's face it, Josh, there wasn't a lot of deep content in the Harry Potter series.
We don't know that. We haven't read that. Plus, you're going to have people boycott us by saying that. That's going to be something I read later on.
Excuse me, I just got done reading Hyperion. I promise you Harry Potter will not be Hyperion.
Well, the Hunger Games only got...
I kid, everyone. Don't boycott us. Please watch the show.
And I will say that the Hunger Games, with its 18 seconds of screen time per page, I can't read that fast. And certainly the Hunger Games movie was nothing to write home about. It did not do the book justice. So that we should show the director these statistics and tell them shame on you.
You know what I want, Josh? I want someone to take a book, and I want every scene from that book put into the movie. I want to see how that would play out. What would happen? Would I enjoy the movie?
John, Watchmen. Zack Snyder, our man Zack Snyder of 300 fame.
It's a comic book, though. It's a comic book, but yes.
It is a true story.
Kind of different.
It's actually, it mirrors Hyperion in the aspect that it's this time-bending, insane book about, do humans deserve a second chance?
Great movie.
I loved Watchmen, yeah. I did read the graphic novel beforehand. So, jumping in to our podcast this week, this is 19th Century Sci-Fi Week for us, and we're discussing that we might have to sit here and just dive into the classics every once in a while. But this is turn-of-the-century stuff by one of the grand masters of science fiction. I don't know anything other than the fact that he scared the heebie-jeebies out of Americans back during the early days of radio when they broadcasted H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And basically, people thought it was real alien invasion. And I can only imagine if that same scenario happened in this day and age, what kind of pandemonium that would cause with such a connected world. Back then, it was, I don't know, maybe we should read upon the history of how many thousands of people freaked out, ran out to the streets, but the whole world wasn't listening to the radio broadcast. But enough people were to make it a kind of a folk tale. And I do know that. But you introduced me to H.G. Wells with two of his short stories that we're going to cover in this podcast. He has a huge amount of source material. You know more about H.G. Wells, John. Tell us his other big claims to fame, and we'll jump into his two short stories we're reading for this podcast.
Not a problem. Before I do that, I have a question for you, though. So, when you read H.G. Wells, you have to think to yourself, is this the original sci-fi? Okay? And there was another author out around the same time called Jules Verne, and if you've ever watched the Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, yes. I don't know how you could not classify something like that as sci-fi, but Jules Verne also wrote something about men going to the moon. Jules Verne was around in the 1860s. That's when he was writing. H.G. Wells came along in the 1890s and started publishing his stuff. So those two, to me, I kind of put them hand in hand, even though one was way ahead. So maybe you would say Jules Verne is the original. But when you start reading things online and looking into it, a lot of I don't know if I want to say scholars, but people that discuss this try to say that science fiction was around when Gilgamesh was written, and maybe some Beowulf, and because. And I don't know the exact text, but things were discussed maybe about a flight to the moon or something like that. And here's my thought on this: Jules Verne is when it started. There may have been something that came out in the 1600s that discussed, but my issue with trying to push like the real true start of sci-fi any earlier than Jules Verne is that they had no concept of computers, spaceships, outer space, just none of that stuff, laser beams. They didn't know anything about that. And I think in order to have true sci-fi, there has to be some concept of these technological things that we haven't been able to get to yet. And Jules Verne, way ahead of his time. H.G. Wells, you read this stuff, he's kind of ahead of his time. War of the Worlds was visionary. First Men in the Moon, another one of his big novels, I think was just put him ahead of his time. We weren't traveling to the moon then. So my question to you, Josh, is do you think the same way? Could there have been sci-fi before the 1800s?
You know what? Greek mythology societies way back before written history, they I guess tried to explain the unknown in their own different ways, and that's where we get Greek mythology and these other histories of our planet and of other worlds. So science fiction, it wasn't a term. It didn't, science fiction relates to maybe the industrial age where we get technology that gives us new ideas of thinking, of going further distances, or doing connecting on our planet in different ways than we ever could, or exploring parts of the planet that we could never reach before. Like I said, Jules Verne, that was fascinating. I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and you're right. He really kind of opened up, with new technology that man was inventing. What could we do with it? So before that, yeah, there was stories that always try to explain the otherness, the unexplainable, the mysteries of creation and what was beyond. What were those little twinkling stars or twinkling lights in the sky? So I love how, I guess, within society we kind of immediately took our imaginations in a different direction, and this whole genre popped up. Don't know the history of it, don't know how it came up, but we do have these forebears of what we consider contemporary, science fiction, who had a tremendous imagination. So what we read really was really interesting, because it kind of bared out that whole issue of, okay, new technology, what do we do with it? And what is it scary? Does it bring these mysteries out into the open that scare us even more, or explain things like the boogeyman doesn't really exist? So I love H.G. Wells' imagination. And which story are we going to cover first?
I say we cover the flowering of the strange orchid, because I need to make one more comment, and that is H.G. Wells studied science, as in like college level studying science. He was supposed to get some sort of degree in that at one point when I was reading in his bio. He ended up dropping out, but he is a sci-fi author who actually had studied science, and he was writing about a lot of these things that he actually understood. And I don't know what the study would be on current sci-fi authors, but I highly doubt that a lot of your major sci-fi authors right now are actually physicists, or you pick a study in science that would lend itself to a space odyssey. And that's a big statement. I don't really know if I can back that up, but I just have a funny feeling I'm probably right. So he actually did study science, and you see that come out in the flowering of the strange orchid.
He was like a Renaissance man. He was able to write fiction about these burgeoning fields in science, and man, he had a wild imagination. So I would classify the flowering of the strange orchid as suspense. It has a lot of suspense in it, and what else? Mystery, maybe just a pinch of horror, and then it does
exactly. It was weird.
It was really cool, but it opens up with a gentleman who doesn't think his life is filled with enough adventure, and I guess he's complaining to his cousin.
Winter Wedderburn.
I couldn't pronounce his name. Wedderburn.
Wedderburn.
We're gonna call him Mr. W or Wedderburn.
Exactly, Mr. W. There you go.
The one thing I love is because there's so many short stories. H.G. Wells, he didn't necessarily flesh out all his characters into these like big archetypes and big characters that we would normally be invested in. They were such short stories. He set the scenery, and then he moved forward with the plot. He wasn't doing a lot of character building, but it's really interesting that he still made them come to life and made you understand what kind of person this would be if you met them in real life. And Wedderburn was just kind of this plodding, woe is me, kind of going the day-to-day routine, and he has a couple of hobbies, but he complains to his cousin, who happens to be his housekeeper. I guess back in the day, families kind of had to employ each other and hang around each other. Who knows what the economics were like? And so his cousin listens to him bemoaning his life, but he does collect flowers, and so he's excited to go to market and get these flowers. So he gets a couple of flowers, and lo and behold, the strange orchid is one of them, and it right away gives the cousin the creeps, and she becomes kind of a stereotypical character. Just she's complaining, she's like doom and gloom. Maybe she's the one who's foreshadowing what this strange orchid is, and
Well, there was a bit of a story behind that too. Is the man that actually recovered it from the deep dark jungle or wherever it came from was found dead, right? And he was clutching this thing to his chest, right? And it looked like it had these little tentacles or something weird coming out that just kind of gave her
yeah,
pause for thought.
It was withered up. No, it was withered up and ugly and clumpy.
Okay, that's right.
And all the rest of the orchids that he went to market to buy died, but this one survived. And yeah, it was the story that's what gave this story kind of that foreboding kind of tone the whole way through. It's because this thing came from an island far away. Basically, someone did die to get this shipped all the way to England, and so it was kind of like the flower trade is a dangerous business over in some exotic land. And so the cousins, like, it could have tinges of malaria and all this other stuff, things that you don't think about these days. But it was very strange and mysterious to her. So she eventually wouldn't go near it. So when it started blooming, the man becomes obsessed with it. Wedderburn was like meditating over it, thinking long hours. Maybe he found a new species of flower. Maybe this was the excitement. He did have kind of this idea that something special would happen to him because he has a boring life. I guess it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the guy pretty much meditated in his greenhouse over this flower. It did start to show life. That's when it got its tentacles, and that was the first creepy part. It was kind of like 5 fingers stretching out, and the lady, again, I didn't like the cousin simply because she complained incessantly. It was a bad mojo, but he didn't listen, and she just, she was kind of the helpless character who just was like, I don't want to go near it. But that's kind of the fun, Wells, even back in the day, with character development, he played with your expectations, it comes to find out, because Wedderburn is obsessed, and he's nurturing this thing, and it becomes what? A foot-long tentacles. All the tentacles grow huge. This thing becomes this huge plant. It reminded me of Little Shop of Horrors with Seymour's pet Venus flytrap. Maybe that Venus flytrap was an homage to this strange orchid. But Wells described it in detail, and we kind of get a sense of how it became Wedderburn's obsession. But then what he flips the script on us in a couple of ways. What did he do, John?
Well, we have to remember too. This was published in a magazine, and or newspaper. I can't remember. I think it was a magazine. So there wasn't a lot of time for him to flesh out this full-blown story. Like he had to get to the point.
I read it on the internet.
What's that? Yeah. Okay. Well, touche. Flip the script. I didn't really catch where he flipped the script. I just know at one point the housekeeper said. Yeah, let's not go there. The housekeeper said, I'm not going back in that place anymore at all. And he did go back in, and then he was missing for tea one day, and she went out to try to find him, and there he is lying on the floor in his greenhouse.
Well, I'll tell you what I was referring to. It's more the characters, because the whole setup is, she's kind of this timid, scared person, like you just said. So the reason Wedderburn is unconscious on the ground in his greenhouse is because the orchid finally bloomed, and it had this strange perfume. It was an enclosed space in the greenhouse, and it turns out that the smell was actually a sleeping agent.
Toxin.
It was a toxin. Yes, that sounds a lot better than sleeping agent. But it's kind of like it. It was how it made it got its prey near it. It would basically let the prey smell it. The prey would fall asleep, and the tentacles do turn out to be blood-sucking tentacles, essentially.
Yeah, the book said that perfume was intensely sweet.
Yeah, it was something you couldn't resist, I guess. And certainly the main character, he was fascinated the whole way through, and he basically was being sucked dry when his cousin came in, and so the characterization, she could have freaked out and left. You think about the context, think about maybe the readers in the 19th century, like, holy cow, women, they made reference to how men would go off in the jungle and do whatever, live off the land, and the women would be too timid to do that. I can't remember the exact words. So it was interesting that she became the protagonist, or she became the heroine. She went in there instead of leaving him to die, because he'd been in there for some time. She basically she didn't have to fight a Venus flytrap, but she conquered her fears, and she went in, and she, instead of fainting, because she could have been the next victim, she got
She had to fight
lightheaded.
it off, yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. I like that scene. She fought it off. She threw the flower pots through the windows to get more ventilation in the greenhouse, and she basically ripped at her cousin. She ripped at him and broke the stalk of the orchid and dragged him out with the orchid still attached to him. And they even went so far as to say, she couldn't pull him away, so she had to disentangle him from these killer blood-sucking tentacles. So for me, it was just like, wow, she's the hero. I would have never seen that coming. And so that's the characterization that I found really, really good, because she became the hero, and she saved her cousin. And
Ended. It's done. It's over. Story over.
It is over.
With her, and then, all right, we're done. And the guy's like, huh, yeah, that was really strange. Huh, how about that? Okay, let's go have tea,
Next. No, there's a few more funny details. It's just how they ended it, because she was. What's that?
There's a magazine
Article. I love how the handyman, when she was dragging her cousin out, and the handyman was looking at the whole scene, and he's thinking, she's a murderer, or what's going on here? She tried to offer her cousin get the house. No, but she basically, she took charge and told him to go get the doctor. But at the very end, Winterdum, he basically he was like, man, that was a great adventure. He was like, let's go have tea, and I can talk about my adventure. I no longer have a boring life. Oh, I almost got killed by this strange plant. But I don't know. It's just like he seemed kind of disconnected from reality. He's like,
he was proud of himself.
He was proud of exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you're disconnected, dude. Totally disconnected. But that was a good story because of just in that small space of time, it was a fun tale, and I liked the characters and how both of them seemed timid. It might have been a family trait, but she ended up being the hero, and I just thought that was cool. And that might make it one of the, how they do in front of Disney movies now and Pixar movies, they have those little shorts. They should start doing live-action shorts of H.G. Wells. I'm totally going to option for that. I'm going to pitch that to a Hollywood studio, dude. H.G. Wells shorts in front of like science fiction or horror movies. What do you think?
Let me in on some of that money. hey, look, I can summarize this story real quick, okay? You got some guy that wants to do something awesome, and he's all excited about it, and he almost kills himself, right? And then at the end, he gets up, he beats death, and he's like, oh, that was totally awesome!
Let's do that again.
In the movie, yeah.
I don't think he learned his lesson.
No.
No, you're right.
Great story, though.
Poor guy. He has to have something to look forward to.
But hey, I noticed something though about this, and really it was with both stories. They were both set here on Earth, and it's kind of hard to say something is sci-fi when it's here on Earth and it doesn't include something into the future, right?
Or aliens, yeah.
Right, where we got flying cars and things, right? Or aliens. But considering H.G. Wells' science background, it would make sense that he would have a story like this. And I thought too, they didn't really know a whole lot about what was here on Earth anyway, scientifically. So they were still exploring all these things. This actually was kind of cutting edge. And just like we'll see in the next story, Into the Abyss, as they go underwater, it's kind of cutting edge. I mean, it's not outer space, but it's still things that people don't know a lot about.
Well, think about it. 1980s, you had the swamp thing. The swamps around the world, that was still, a rich source of mystery. I mean, geez, there's been some recent movies, not necessarily about this genre, but they're talking about, there's a lot of unexplored places and what mysteries. Even Medicine Man with Sean Connery was about, the cure for cancer is stuck in these hundreds of acres of rainforest, So yeah. People still go there, Journey to the Center of the Earth. what's frozen up in the Arctic. So I love all these stories. You can, if you use your imagination, Earth is rich in undiscovered areas. In the Abyss touches on one of those areas that is still unexplored. We still don't have the technology to really go to the abyss, the bottom of the ocean, and that's what this next story is about. I loved it because it was kind of man defying nature. It was man saying, I will use this new technology and try to find out something that's been kept from us for eons. He's basically going to the bottom of the ocean. So, this kind of harkened back to Atlantis and the story, the movie called The Abyss, where they go to the bottom of the ocean, and just great stories that kind of delve in the mystery of what is down there. And I thought this was fun for what it represented. And we'll get to the big aha payoff. But the way it opened up was hilarious. It was basically a Navy ship with this submergible sphere, a little small sphere. H.G. Wells trying to sit here and conceptualize and figure out how can a man survive under all these tons of pressure. So I love the story setup because you don't know where it's going, and you immediately think it's just a survival story of this man. Will he get squashed under all this pressure? And they go into the scientific explanation of pounds per square inch. And what would happen if he doesn't survive? He's pretty much like an insect on a windshield. He'll come up and we'll see. We won't see much except what's splattered on the walls. So I'm just laughing this whole time because you're like, holy cow. People back then, when, again, with the industrial age and looking at, hey, what are these contraptions being built with steel and with, these gears and moving parts, and what and what can we do with that? And these guys are testing, testing their luck into the deep abyss. And these sailors who are not going down are making bets on, will he survive, or will the windows actually cave in and he'll be gone. So it was fun introduction in the abyss.
Yeah, Wells, he I caught that too. I mean, he couldn't help but catch it about the pressure and the pounds per square inch and things. He didn't quite have it right. I think I may be wrong. I'm sure someone will correct me if they watch this. All 500,000 of our listeners. So just whoever you are, let me know if I'm wrong. But I don't think they quite understood how it works on descent and then ascent. You can't do it as fast as he was talking, because I think if you ascend from that much pressure as fast, you have to have time to depressurize some. So right. he was talking about that thing just shooting back up onto the surface of the water. I don't think you can actually do that without it really screwing the person up that's inside.
You know what? Even I remember that from science as a kid. Yeah, they might have not gotten to this part in deep sea diving, but basically you get the bends, right? You get actual air in your bloodstream, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you can die from that, but you might be severely crippled. Or
air bubbles in your bloodstream. Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That'll kill you. Yes.
There you go.
Bad, very bad.
So that's the answer to that question. So yeah, being shot up like a Coke out of a Coke bottle. Yeah, that's exactly what they explained would happen on the ascent. So I was thinking, I don't think you can do that.
Oh, well, it's the 1890s. They're forgiven. They get a pass.
We'll cut them some slack.
They didn't know.
So this is a fun story because everybody pretty much gives the guy 30 minutes. I think the dive, they've calculated down to the minutes, so that he's only supposed to be a 30-minute on the floor expedition. Then again, he'll rocket back up. But basically, he goes down.
Calculated. Sorry.
Major miscalculation. He goes down and he doesn't come back up. And he goes over the edge. It's kind of really simple how they drop him in the water, and he goes down. He doesn't come back up. I think they find him the next day. He does rocket back up maybe that night. I remember that.
Yeah, it was around midnight or so. Hey, he had a great freak out moment when he first started going down. Do you remember that? They start going down, and he can hear it kind of creaking, and then he says to himself, he's like, boy, I hope this thing works. And then he goes, well, I can't worry about it now.
See, why did I forget about that? Because that's what they're building up to. Will he or won't he make it? I forgot about that part. But I remember the fact he came up a day later, and they pulled him out there, and you're kind of anticipating what are they going to see when they open the door. You know, is it going to be like the creature from the Blue Lagoon or the Deep Abyss, and is he possessed, or is he just splat on the wall? But basically, he had fainted, and it was steaming hot inside. And again, H.G. Wells trying to explain friction, trying to explain maybe the temperature differentiations, and a whole other host of things that were kind of believable if you just looked at it at face value. So he had fainted, and he started coming around, and he finally told his fascinating tale. So you get to hear firsthand about his story, which is fun, because he first starts talking about, we did have the calculations wrong. He was spinning out of control. He was getting, I think, nauseous on his.
He was getting tossed around the whole cabin as that thing was spinning. He was getting all banged up.
Around. Yeah. I'm like, poor guy. So, and who knows how long it takes to get to the bottom of the ocean. They made it seem like it was a quick trip. But no, I did love how he went from the ocean that they knew to this complete, black hole, essentially, where there's nothing, no light. So it was, it didn't talk about his feelings, but I can only imagine being alone, being, like an astronaut, being the first person to do this. That's kind of the feeling. If we want to equate this to like Man on the Moon, this is man going to the bottom of the ocean. So, it was, they made it a small scale story, so there was no, I don't know, it wasn't like huge headlines, but it was the man going down the bottom of the ocean, and he survived. But it was really fun to sit here and see him kind of experience that, all the things that could have gone wrong, and he had a little bit of hiccups, and then he hit the rock bottom, and it explained in a little bit of detail, what the bottom of the ocean looked like: weird, odd, fluorescent fish and fluorescent vegetation. You're like, okay, yeah, we know this. So nothing super exciting.
Yeah, but did they know that at the time, or was he making that up? I don't know that. I didn't read up on it. Had they actually been down far enough to see those fish that had the glowing?
Who knows?
It was kind of, because that was all true. I mean, maybe what he described was made up, but he had the concept right, and I didn't know if they actually knew that at the time, that they'd actually seen it.
That's a good point. Man, they probably couldn't even take pictures back then. So if he guessed fluorescent fish, then the guy was psychic. But that is pretty impressive. But maybe he took his scientific principles and said, yes, things at the bottom of the ocean have to kind of give off their own light. But then he goes into science fiction territory, 100%. He sees his little fish, fluorescent fishy friends that had been following him down on the way down. He sees them float away, and he sees this kind of silhouette, a shape coming through the water, and I can't remember this whole first what do you call it, first encounter with an alien, but it's the first encounter of this creature he sees coming along. Then he realizes that it's a lizard-like creature, but it's not walking on all fours. This thing is walking on 2 feet like a biped, and it's standing almost all the way upright, or it is upright. So you're like, holy cow, this thing is coming right up to him, and it has no reason to be there under the water. So it's kind of freaky. He's in a little bubble. He can't escape. They explain the whole mechanism. He has to, I can't remember the release mechanism to get him back to the top, but the guy can't do anything. And you're like, holy cow. So what would you do in that situation, this thing coming towards you?
My first thought would be to just press myself up against the edge of the cabin and try not to be seen. I don't know why. I just pictured this thing coming up, because it appears in the window, right? And I just picture this thing coming up and going, hey there, what you doing? Oh, and the reason he was stuck down there is because they'd had a mechanism that was going to automatically cut the cable that was keeping him down there, and he'd shoot back up, and something had been jammed with that mechanism somehow, I think. Or these things screw it up. Something happens right here where he can't get back to the surface right away. But yeah, I would have been pressed up against the cabin.
That's pretty funny. Kind of make yourself blend into the cushions. Like, not here, I'm not here. So the thing, I think, yells at him and makes this high-pitched scream. And I think he turns off his light, and he's
should we try to recreate that scream for the listeners?
Go for it.
No, I'm not
Go
doing that.
for it.
Okay.
I'd be like, oh.
That's good. That's good right there.
I would seriously, yeah. I'm gonna be a sound effects guy. That's my sound effects career. Right here, you saw it here first on Random Books. So basically, he at some point turns off his light. I don't know why it's fuzzy for me because I did read this recently, but he's trying to figure out how to get unjammed or get out of there. And the thing, he starts moving. He's in there for a while, and then he starts moving. He realizes it's not because of the mechanism working how it's supposed to, and he's not going up. He's being pulled somewhere. And he's being pulled by said alien or, amphibious underwater creature that is like man. But his light is off, and his eyes have adapted, and he starts to, I don't know if he's kind of semi-floating or if he's being dragged along the bottom, but he does get a perspective of where he's being dragged to, and it's a city or a town with underwater dwellings with these things, and he starts to make out houses without roofs, and he starts to make out ships, which I would think is like a shipyard, a wreckage, and they built their town around this, and they put him down in front of what is an altar, and it's like maybe inside of a building, I can't remember, you have to remind me, and they're worshiping him, essentially. So they've dragged him to the very center of their society, and they're worshiping him. And he's fascinated, and he's trying to make out what he can in the darkness. He turns on his light again, and then I think all the chanting stops, and the head priest or whoever he is yells again, and it must be something more terrifying.
Josh.
It must be more terrifying than the last one because he turns off his light.
Well, he was trying to figure out how to tell them, hey, I've got to go back where I came from because I can't breathe anymore. So.
I forgot he's running out of air. Did he try to communicate with him?
He was trying. He was trying to figure that out, and I don't think he ever did. And at some point, they just, I don't know, they let him go, right?
I think the mechanism released on its own. They might have let him go. We can speculate on that, or we can just ignore that detail because where this story really, I guess, comes alive and really comes into its own is talking about what the society was revolved around, or rather, what it must have been like for them to live down there in the abyss, where these strange things from the sky, strange things would periodically come from their heavens or come from this upper world. It's all dark down there, so these things would come, strange things, all different types of ships, different types of knickknacks and trinkets that came down out of the skies. And so if you think about it, it's like, whoa, what is this? And their whole culture probably, revolves around these things that come down and how they view them, I guess. So it was really fascinating to me. I'm not doing it justice. Wells really described it as this, as this kind of bizarre experience that they would have their whole lives. And if we can imagine things falling out of the sky here on Earth above the water, it'd be interesting. What would we make out of it? Would we worship these things, create altars, and create, building or statues and worship of things that came from outer space? So it's kind of, if you look at that analogy, we haven't had that problem, but it's interesting because that's exactly what it's like, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I don't think we would worship it, but we would be in awe of it and probably afraid of it too. And I imagine they probably started worshiping him out of fear a little bit. They didn't know who he was. I am pretty sure that he somehow motioned to them to let him go, because at that point the mechanism should have cut that cable already. He was only supposed to be down there for about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
He should have gone back up. I can't remember. But this is a bit of a comment on Wells' writing. His first name, by the way, is Herbert, so we're just going to call him Herbie for the rest of this episode. But Herbie's writing, it was a little bit hard to follow at points, and it was good. It was to the point, and it did use good language. I mean, it wasn't just junk, third grade level writing, but I remember I had to go back a couple times and reread a couple of paragraphs and say, oh, hold on, I must have missed something. And then you realize it felt a little bit disjointed sometimes, going from paragraph to paragraph. It jumped. And that may be indicative of it being published in, is it right to call it serialized? I mean, it was a magazine. It was published in a magazine, so maybe that's why. But, yeah, a little bit hard to follow some of it.
Nah, man, we could sit here and we could do a little stage play with puppets, man. It was easy. We could be the little amphibian guys and have a little ball come down on a string and
with a flashlight inside.
Yeah.
It was a long week, wasn't it, Josh?
It was a long week. we have Lego ships crashing down from the sky. That'd be awesome, and they would smash on the ocean floor. Come on, man. This has potential. This really has potential.
I would play with Legos.
So that was really fascinating because, like you said, we might not worship things coming out from the stars, but you mentioned how they would worship him or revered him probably out of fear more than anything else. And it's funny you said that because that's a common theme when you have something that's seemingly more powerful than you. A common theme in fiction or science fiction might be, you obviously are subservient to it. And it might not be a theme per se, but I'm thinking about the fact I just watched King Kong with my son, and we're trying to find literature on King Kong, and there's the classic tale of Skull Island where the tribe builds a huge wall, tries to keep him out, sacrifice occasional tribe girl, but basically they kind of deify him because he's bigger, stronger, and it's kind of like please leave us in peace. And it's just something they can't control and is unknown. But anyway, King Kong, again, might have been influenced by, H.G. Wells. You never know. But our young sailor friend survives. He gets back up to the surface. We find out, we knew this because he came back, and he has all these plans to fix the issues with his mechanical sphere and go back. And so after a few days, weeks, I don't know, he does go back. They figure they got everything fixed. And he goes back down into the depths, and we expect to see our friends again. But H.G. Wells pulls a quick one, and we never see the sphere or the sailor again. He never comes back. So I was really speculating on what happened there. We're just talking.
It was a perfect ending, really, for a short story, because my first thought was, maybe he figured out how to survive down there, and now he's living with the underwater sea people. I mean, I liked that. I don't know how.
Wishful thinking.
I don't know how that would have happened, but whatever. Now, he's probably smashed. They probably broke open the sphere, and then he got crushed.
The end. Perfect ending. You're right. For a short story, what are you going to do, man? What are you going to do? But you're the H.G. Wells expert, John. We're going to go back to the well. Pun intended. We're going to go back to the H.G. Wells well. We're going to do that occasionally in between our books. So it's all in the public domain. Pick up some H.G. Wells books. We might actually come up with a reading list, and you can submit your questions. But is there any expertise, any other guidance on that you want to give them, John?
No, I got a little bit more background on H.G. Wells, and just that the science fiction stuff that he did was really a small part of his career. He was actually more of a political writer, and he was very well respected all the way into the 20s and 30s as being one of the major thinkers of our society. And the sci-fi stuff, it really was a small piece. That wasn't his true love. He wasn't a sci-fi writer by definition, where that's the stuff he liked to write. He did a lot of other things, but yet his sci-fi work was so great. I mean, here we are talking about it. So
that is really
pretty cool guy.
Renaissance man, indeed. So that concludes our short story H.G. Wells podcast this week. But next week we are revving back up for the sequel to epic book from last week, Hyperion. The continuation of Hyperion. It's a universe that we just have to go back to, and I call it the epic book. Why not? That's going to be its official nickname because the story continues. The ending of the first one, for whoever has not read it, we will not spoil, but let me just say it's kind of like The Matrix. Insofar as we find out The Matrix is not what it seems, The Matrix is not going to be the same ever again because Neo is inside. So we are excited to go back to the fall of Hyperion. and we are going to kick that off next week's podcast, and we're going to find out what happens in this universe. John, this is a space saga of immense proportions. They actually have a website for people who want to see this made into a movie. They call it the unfilmable movie. But in this day and age, I think with any amount of financing, any amount of creative artists, we could see a movie one day. But until that day comes, we have it in our minds that this is, I don't know, some of the best science fiction. So we're going to keep at it, and we're going to hopefully get some new readers to join us and find out what Hyperion is all about.
Now, look, I have to throw this out before we're done. If we get to the end of the fall of Hyperion, and there's still a bunch of unanswered questions, I'm sorry. I mean, we couldn't help ourselves. We had to read the second part. I have to find out what the Shrike is. I am obsessed with finding out. So
we are.
Hopefully something kind of gets wrapped up a little bit more, and I'm really excited.
All the reviews say that. Don't worry, John. We will actually have our questions answered. The Wizard of Oz, the curtains will be pulled back, and that's kind of essentially the story. And then there's 2 more parts after that. The Hyperion Cantos is a 4-part series. So yes, even if we don't cover the last 2, we will be reading that in our spare time.
Awesome.
And I'll be putting in the Goodreads group and saying, "Oh my goodness!" But let's stop hyping it up. Hyperion, hyperbole? I don't think so. Hyperion's awesome. Join us for the fall of Hyperion and for the next podcast next week. John, it's been awesome. Keep it real, man.
Have a great weekend.
See ya.